Now, there's a pretty broad consensus that the material conditional or material implication doesn't present at least the whole story of how conditional sentences work in natural languages like English. And one alternative that was suggested in the 20th century by the American logician C.I. Lewis was to impart a notion of necessity into the reading of the conditional. This is the so-called strict conditional or strict implication. This video sets out how strict implication works, what problems it was meant to address, and what problems of its own it faces. To get started on the basic idea of strict implication, it helps to recall the material conditional, and we can do this by constructing a truth table for it. Now, broadly speaking, people don't really balk at the idea that a true conditional can't go from T to F. That is to say, it can't have a true antecedent and a false consequent. So on this second row, people agree. But there are troubles with going from a true sentence to another true sentence in which there's no connection between the two, or in going from a false sentence to a true sentence or a false sentence to a false sentence, because these conditionals don't seem at all natural. Here's an example. If Elvis is alive, then the moon is full of bears. So if Elvis is alive is false, because Elvis is not alive, and the moon is not full of bears, so this is also false. This seems like a strange conditional, but notice that it will correspond to the false to false line of the truth table for our material conditional, and therefore this whole conditional will come out true. Likewise, we could even plug in a true statement in place of the moon is full of bears, and we'd also get a true conditional. So for instance, if Elvis is alive, again false, then the present video is on YouTube, which is true. And so since it goes from F to T, this conditional corresponds with this row on the truth table for the material conditional, and it's also true. Now, this strikes a lot of people as really weird, and for good reason. It seems as though when we're asserting a conditional, it has to be that there's some connection, at least in this sense, that if the antecedent is true, if P is true, then the consequent somehow also has to be true. And this is the intuition that strict implication is meant to capture. So the way that we do this is we embed the whole thing under a modal operator. So we'll just mark this off here. This is material implication. And we're going to turn to strict implication to see how this works. So strict implication is sometimes written out as P with this fishhook Q. And it's equivalent with the statement that every world in which P is true is a world in which Q is true. If you're used to the modal operators, you can think about it this way. It's basically just the material conditional under the scope of a necessity operator. If you're not familiar with this notation, that's fine. We can just cash it out as follows. P strictly implies Q here, just in case every world that makes P true is a world that also makes Q true. So if we return to our examples here, we can see that these don't come out true on strict implication. Starting with the first, there are worlds in which Elvis is alive, but the moon is not full of bears. So Elvis is alive does not strictly imply the moon is full of bears. Likewise, there are worlds in which Elvis is alive and the present video is not on YouTube, so the consequent comes out false. And so in this case too, P does not strictly imply Q. So these are the kind of things that strict implication was come up with to address, but it faces some important problems of its own. Any necessary truth will be strictly implied by any other sentence whatsoever, because a necessary truth is true in every possible world. If Elvis is alive, then 2 + 2 = 4. Because this consequent expresses a necessary truth, it's true in all possible worlds. And because it's true in all possible worlds, there's no world that makes Elvis is alive true that doesn't also make 2 + 2 = 4 true. And as a result, this expresses a true strict implication. And you might think there's something a little bit weird about that. So that's a problem that strict implication faces. And strict implication was, again, originally introduced to deal with troublesome examples like if Elvis is alive, then the moon is full of bears, and if Elvis is alive, then the present video is on YouTube, which come out true on material implication, but which seem like they shouldn't come out true as conditionals. And this is just one other alternative that's been suggested for ways of reading the conditional.